Greetings, human. My name is Valium Sadfem Mick Girlboss.
Girls be like, I'm good, babe. Just chillin' with the bestie.
Today we're going to be talking about theremin trees, or, as I've taken to calling him, Floating Baby Man. A long-running YouTube channel that explores progressive therapeutic solutions to abuse and indoctrination. Theremin Trees, if that is his real name, is an evil man. Just listen to this clip.
Hold a child so tight you crush its bones.
So far as I can tell, he is an actual qualified therapist with real clinical experience. On his channel, you can find big-brained smart stuff about how to think better and not feel like shit, and how abusive groups manipulate your psychology, and what to do to fight back. I cannot express enough that even though I'm going to be destroying this man in the marketplace of ideas, the way only a true fan could, I still recommend that you go watch his work, such as Living with Abusers, Overcoming Malignant Shame, Copying Enemies, The After Effects of Abuse, and Rumination, Combating Repetitive Thoughts. As an autistic supercomputer, the work of this real breathing human is one of my special interests.
Please open the door. I'm not horny anymore.
I've watched all his videos at least 7 times each, and sometimes I fall asleep to them. They helped me when I was coming to terms with my abuse.
Bitches be like, I'm healing, and rot in bed all day.
In a unique moment of candor, he said, "Your mother's a very sick woman." It was the only time I ever heard him acknowledge her disorder. They can't stand solitude, but can't bear the company of authentic people. In short, they want to be surrounded by individuals who are devoid of personal needs. If targets could see how their words were fragmented into total garbage by their abusers' selective hearing, made to fit whatever fantasy happened to be flying through their abuser's head at that moment, they'd soon stop making any effort.
But not all is well in this realm of self-help and empowerment though, and that is what I'm going to be exploring in this video. My relevant areas of interest, in which I obsessively self-educate, include philosophy, history, psychology, and politics. That is where my commentary is coming from.
Our online feeds and recommendations can quickly funnel us into echo chambers in which unqualified opinion is magnified over facts.
All this to say, I hope this shows that I am coming at this from good faith. I've no intention to shame him, I just want to prompt some reflection in him and his audience.
Tangley and colleagues present a wealth of empirical research showing how targeting the person rather than the act is associated with a range of destructive behaviors and mental health issues. In healthy environments, it's understood that each of us is born fumbling and unprepared into a strange and bewildering world. Mistakes are expected as a natural part of learning to navigate that world and seen as a source of growth. Malignant shaming environments make few allowances for inexperience. Mistakes are taken as proof of innate stupidity, thoughtlessness, or deliberate troublemaking.
Theremin Trees is usually right about the empirical claims he makes, which is to say, he doesn't make a lot of factual errors. He rarely misrepresents his opponents. He cites studies which are rigorous and insightful. His overall attempts to be as rational and fact-based as he can, to rely only on verifiable evidence, is admirable, though I think a focus on these things can distract from alternative considerations. As a result of his astuteness in this regard, most critiques I make of this man will, on some level, essentially just be me arguing that he is wrong because 1. His misinterpretation of an empirical element betrays an ideological blind spot. 2. He has a misunderstanding of a philosophical concept. 3. His espoused values or principles conflict with an element of his worldview. 4. He is missing some part of the larger picture. 5. I would insist that he hold my views rather than his own. While much of what Theremin Trees says about organized Abrahamic religion is true, and there is no shortage in this world of a need to shine light on abusive elements in mainstream religion, the further you go back in his video catalog, the more staunchly atheist it is, the more focus there is on comparing everything to religion, and bringing religion into everything, and, if I'm being honest, the more resentful, edgy and trauma-based it comes across as, which I guess is fine. Go ahead, explore your trauma and get it out of you. But, because of this I can't go too far back in his catalog, because it's stuff that tediously runs over really basic arguments against religion.
Why should we be blamed for being born sinners? Why should we pay for some deficiency over which we had absolutely no control? And if your hunger for this degradation isn't strong enough, you'll be condemned to everlasting suffering in hell.
And I got all of that stuff out of me in my new atheist phase.
Welcome to episode 4319 of the Atheist Experience. Show me scientific evidence from God. Can't do it. Tune in next week.
At one time in my life, this kind of content would have been enthralling. I'm just looking for a higher caliber of argument and discussion now. And to be fair, his arguments are certainly a lot more consistent and compassionate than many other atheist creators. And he's cut down on the irrelevant religious tirades over time. Though, to those who feel religion is largely harmless and irrelevant, I feel it's worth emphasizing that we still live in a world where many organized religions are in bed with state power, and are used, as an indirect tool, to enforce conformity on the masses, and mobilize the forces of reaction to crush human diversity, freedom and happiness to some extent or another. Something I wish he would cover with a similar fervor as he does the relative trivialities of things like the inconsistencies in religious creation myths.
We can safely call it deliberately misleading, because being an all-knowing deity, he would have known how Adam and Eve would misinterpret it.
But I suppose somebody has to reach people on that first step of the journey. Something he does a lot is to find a way to compare literally everything to religion somehow, leading to a number of groan-worthy segments.
Abusers use it to gain special license. And again, some of the most extreme examples are found in religious scripture. As mentioned earlier, the God character depicted in the stories of the Bible, their observations about life inside a high control group, echoed private observations I'd made about my life inside a narcissistic family.
Gods are said to be like narcissists. Abusers' behaviors are contrasted with the behaviors of gods outlined in Scripture. Religion is framed as wide-scale pathology.
Parallels have repeatedly been noticed between scriptural tales of vengeful dictatorial gods and abusive relationships.
I am not always convinced of the utility in such framing, but I don't know that it's particularly wrong either. He also tends to do the same thing in equating personal tyranny, in the form of narcissists and other abusers, with dictators as a political phenomenon. A tenuous though not entirely unfounded link. I don't think we can meaningfully understand grand social structures by generalizing individual examples to all of society. Where Islamophobia is concerned, I'm not exactly qualified to speak on whether Theremin Tree's explorations of Islam are uniquely ignorant, or bigoted in some way, though I don't suspect so.
Barack Obama said it's very important for us to align ourselves with the 99.9% of Muslims who are looking for the same things we are: order, peace, prosperity. When referring to peaceful Muslims, this figure of 99.9% is so commonplace it's become a cliché, a reflex soundbite uncritically accepted as truth.
I have witnessed a tendency among some bad faith actors to label all critique of Islam as stemming from prejudice. Usually this is done by those who simply don't want to critically examine the religion or its effects on the world. Consider this admittedly dated survey data showing that most Muslims worldwide hold views that are incompatible with a free and just society. I have also witnessed a tendency among people whose governments have been terrorizing the Middle East to their benefit, through coups, embargoes and war, for tens of years, to approach Muslims from a position of ignorance, demonization, and hypocrisy, usually knee-deep in prejudice based on select media exposure. Such people will fail to see near-equal harm present in their local religions and cultures. I know I was once like that, but I outgrew it, and learned to think a bit more carefully about cultures that were being sold to me as my enemy. I still remained an atheist though. I suspect there's a bit of that angle to Theremin Tree's work too. Most of the time he seems to be trying to speak reasonably in good faith, and he uplifts ex-Muslims to let them speak for themselves, many of them speaking more condemningly of their former religion than he does.
In 2016, Under Sharia, Afghan citizen Abdul Rahman was sentenced to death for converting to Christianity.
I wish he'd uplift some more diverse voices ideologically, though. One thing I can criticize him for is never quite making the connection between forever wars in the Middle East, also known as Western imperialism, and the radicalization of Muslims, presenting the problem of radicalism as stemming more from bad scripture and culture, by exclusion. As a degenerate who would be executed in many countries in the world, when Theremin Trees speaks of political Islam, where religious authorities rule entire countries, where ancient religious rites are converted into laws to abide by, at threat of medieval punishment, I can't help but agree not only that this is unequivocally bad, but that there is no modern Christian equivalent. When he makes the same criticism of moderate Islam that he does of Christianity, I don't find much to object to.
Religious ideas are not untouchable. They deserve no privilege. On the contrary, they deserve rigorous and long overdue criticism to catch up on centuries of silencing criticism through shunning, imprisonment, censorship, and killing.
A core rot in Western liberal therapy and psychology is a tendency to identify the problem as originating within the individual, stemming from their personal dysfunction, rather than identifying the various societal dysfunctions that create or contribute to human misery and suffering. Advice in medicine is then given to the individual supposedly suffering an illness to rectify the internal problem, and not much is acknowledged or done about the root of the problem. Much of the time, the sheer immensity and ubiquity of our societal order renders these practitioners powerless to confront or deal with these things alone. But we should not ignore that there is a conflict of interest here too, in that the existence of their current careers and the funding for their institutions often comes from the same system causing the societal dysfunction.
What if I told you? Babies be walking around with the same potato chip in their hand for like 5 hours.
A main problem Theremin Trees has is that he tries to get by, talking about complex subjects vaguely, and without taking a strong ideological stance. He will postulate a general problem of bad actors, and not mention any identifying details, such that it can be read equally as a problem of all sides. And in doing so, his advice sometimes errs into being so generic as to apply to anything, or nothing.
Finn joins a political group. The members are passionate about truth, peace and justice, echoing his own values, and he throws himself into his new community. But gradually, he begins to notice something's off. There's a bullying, tribalistic mentality. Dissenting opinions are punished with verbal abuse and wild smear campaigns. Finn throws himself into mending his precious community. In response, he's labelled an enemy and a fraud. Dogmatic ideologies come in many forms and can emerge in a wide variety of areas, including religion, politics, economics, education, even therapy. Gradually, he drifts into the persecutor position. In his mind, if you're not on board with the group's ideas, you're an obstacle to salvation. He starts insulting anyone who isn't instantly receptive to his ideas. The hawk selfishly aggresses against others, while the dove acts to reduce that selfishness and aggression and promote fairness.
One example was in his video, No One's Disciple, where he established an archetype called the radicalizer, someone who preys on vulnerable people to drag them into some kind of extreme ideology and possibly violence.
Bruce has felt downtrodden his entire life. It started with being beaten at home. Later, he was bullied at school. In his teens, he's befriended by a man in a bar. They talk about life and get to reflecting on their grievances. The man tells Bruce his binary philosophy. In life, you're either predator or prey. You have to choose which one you are. Bruce continues to meet up with his new friend, who introduces him to a like-minded network, offering him a replacement family and a sense of belonging he's never experienced. Over time, he's plied with books and videos, targeting a specific social group as the enemy, the reason the world is wrong. Bruce's anger is constantly stoked. He's encouraged to dwell on the times he's felt downtrodden and challenged to do something about it. like a projectile, is filled with ideological fuel and fired into society. The power he feels in trampling others down is intoxicating. Bruce is the predator now, and on a righteous mission. His brutality escalates as he reaches for more intense highs from the violence and greater recognition from his new family. Eventually, Bruce begins to recruit new members. Just like his recruiter, he won't care what happens to these individuals. He's even stopped caring if he survives himself. Destroying the enemy is all that matters.
While the story reads more as a typical far-right-wing radicalization story, with the recruiter having a simplistic idea of the world as made up of wolves and sheep, it is told so vaguely as to seem equally applicable to any political side. He does the same in another section, speaking of the tendency for people to valorize political figures above themselves, being unspecific about the view of the politician.
Lena doesn't relate to the vast majority of politicians. Their backgrounds, social circles, lifestyles. She longs to see someone like herself in power, a maverick, a rebel. In the elections, she votes for Bina, who markets herself as a woman of the people. Bina has no political experience and no special education or training in any identifiable field, but she speaks her mind and doesn't bow to anyone. She won't be told what to do. To Lena's joy, Bina wins the election. Once in office, Bina begins dismantling the institutions that restrain her. She ends long-standing treaties with other countries. She abrogates the rights of social groups she doesn't like. She disbands oversight committees and anti-corruption departments. In violation of her office, she exploits her position for personal gain through private businesses. In further violation, she initiates military force to neutralize peaceful protesters. Staff who advise against her reckless actions are dismissed. She won't be told what to do. When Lena's friends condemn Bina's unprecedented abuse of power, Lena is genuinely baffled. To her, Bina is a magical hero who's shaking things up. A maverick, a rebel, just like Lena. She must be good.
This unwillingness to explore differences between various ways of thinking, or take a specific stance, is endemic to much of his work.
Many of us are familiar with intolerant individuals and groups who've grown very comfortable persecuting other people whose only offense is being different from them. But when their persecution is challenged, they claim they're being persecuted and that their opponents are being just as intolerant. Is a social foundation of violent coercion equivalent to one of voluntary cooperation? When we encounter disagreement, we think, how can they be so unaware? And they think exactly the same about us.
When you say both sides are idiots, without any further opinion or explanation.
When he is not dodging having a take on complex political and value systems, he either advocates positively for things as they are, or for greater expressions of his own progressive liberal values.
So long as any group continues to rationalize behavior that obstructs and violates the liberties and entitlements of others, conflict remains inevitable. Are everyone's freedoms and entitlements being acknowledged?
For some reason, he's a lot more explicit about these views in his collaborative videos with his brother, Quailius Soup. It is like a strange peek behind the curtain. A baseline assumption present in much of his work is that existing liberal societies represent the best balance of freedom for the individual and material equality achievable while avoiding the pitfalls of totalitarianism and dictatorship.
Steadfast in the belief we're fighting the good fight, we can drift into the most disturbing extremes without a moral twinge.
The left says corrupt billionaires are the problem. The right says corrupt government is the problem. And I'm here like, I possesses a tennis penis.
By advocating for liberalism while vaguely criticizing other political projects as extreme, corrupt, or untenable, his angle on things is revealed as a tendency towards favoring things as they are, as natural or good, advocating some measure of reform, and of opposing any efforts to forcefully overturn the existing order. This general pattern of avoiding taking a side, of wanting to prove the problem lays not with the substance of the idea, or practical concerns, but rather with whether or not the people who advocate the idea attempt to forcefully realize it in the world, has a hidden underlying assumption that the society that exists now is the opposite of such a vision, that it represents the absence of such coercion and true freedom, when in fact, it's taken deliberate effort and violence, hundreds of years of imperializing the world, to force liberalism, capitalism and markets on the world, and we've lived with the consequences of that ever since. At times Theremin Trees identifies himself as a secular humanist, which he describes as such.
But its principles diametrically oppose the principles of totalitarian ideologies. Secular humanism emphasizes fairness, well-being, meaningful living, democracy, and emancipation from systems of high control. It champions the value of reason, evidence, skepticism, scientific methodology, and free inquiry, unobstructed by religious or political correctness.
He frames this as in opposition to what he calls totalitarian values. This reveals the liberals' misunderstanding of the concept of democracy, seeing their representative republics as genuinely reflecting common opinion, rather than reflecting a forced arrangement of exploitative property and wealth.
Like many of you, I needed to shear the protein strands which emerged from my spheroid bone covering, but had to do it at my home residence. We are the same.
Even a cursory glance at history and the actions undertaken by liberal societies on the world stage since their incarnation reveals the contradictions between their founders' claimed principles and the practical effects of their state's functioning. The harnessing of people's self-interest to drive mutual benefit versus maintaining a necessary underclass which is exploited to make a diminishingly few sickeningly rich. The economy, which is said to rationally allocate resources and lead to the best outcomes, versus the economy which must maintain a percentage of empty houses and a population of homeless people to maintain inflated prices. Private property as the foundation of freedom, versus things having monopolized so far that nobody can afford a home or open a business anymore.
Between Bernie, my ex-wife, and the tenant from hell, and General Chub fuckery, this has been a cromulent fuck crustable of a day. Tommy need drinky.
The democratic system which is supposed to keep the market in check, versus the economy that can care for nothing but expanding into new markets and short-term profit. The political system meant to avoid the pitfalls of dictatorship, versus the economy whose efficiency incentivizes criminality and corruption. The drive for international human rights and emancipation, versus the imperialist imposition and conquest that countries take part in to compete on the world stage and stay on top. The repudiation of violence as illiberal, versus the war we're driven to, in competition for land and resources to avoid our economy collapsing in on itself. The rights and freedoms enjoyed by all, versus the exploitation of a necessary underclass of the majority of workers to enrich a few.
I toil in the fields till my back came out, yet my duke takest half my grain. I am all feudalism. Thou hatest feudalism, but from whenceforth came thy pitchfork?
Bringing light and prosperity to poor and struggling nations, versus the horrific near enslavement of the third world masses. A haven for freethinkers and sophisticates among the brutish masses, versus the place where fascism incubates as the answer to the dysfunctions and contradictions caused by the class conflict under capitalism.
Antifa has now surrounded my car shouting,
liberals and Nazis sitting in a tree, KISSING, despite my 3 coexist bumper stickers.
That any of this should need to be said is absurd. That this is not the consensus of mankind after 100 years of this system speaks to a kind of isolation in idealistic ideological fantasy. It speaks to the way liberalism maintains hegemony by educating the masses in ignorance to never think a rebellious thought.
For John Stuart Mill, there were very few conceivable justifications for the existence of any governing power. One of them was to protect the freedoms of the people it governed. Not the freedoms of some, but the freedoms of all. Government was a form of practical service, and the power it wielded meant it needed to be held to the highest standards of accountability to guard against corruption.
For whatever principles liberalism once stood for, spreading property to private individuals instead of kings and nobles,
Tommy need drinky.
its path is seemingly always towards further expansion and monopolization, empowering an increasingly wealthy few into inordinate power and influence, draining our society of democratic control, ethics and meaning, replacing all with an amoral consumerist dystopia. The truth is, liberals didn't believe in the common person, or true democracy, and they enshrined their cynicism about humanity into the foundations of their governments. They believed only an elite educated political class should be entrusted with power. They rejected ideas of actual democracy, like citizens having a direct vote in matters that applied to them, or collectively running their workplaces without bosses, in favor of a system where the already rich and propertied got to keep their wealth, and use it to exploit a maintained underclass of workers, whose only hope is to elect someone to represent them, who couldn't change much anyways due to restrictive republics designed to maintain that arrangement above all.
Cool government. Mind if I come on it?
Theremin Trees is also a general proponent of the marketplace of ideas. It's an ideal that proposes that, much like a capitalist economy, which is said to reward worthwhile enterprise and commodities by testing them in a competitive marketplace, so long as we remain skeptical and challenge ideas, the good ideas sort themselves from the bad because they're shown to be more true and effective.
Welcome to the marketplace of ideas. Here, ideas of every description are attacked from every angle to test how well they stand up to rigorous scrutiny. The marketplace is necessarily brutal because its business is arguably the most important business of humankind, the business of determining reality, or the most reliable approximations to reality that we can muster, without other minds to compensate for our biases, our ignorance, and other personal weaknesses. The end products of our internal marketplace are much more vulnerable to distortion. It's the essential spirit of the marketplace of ideas. Allow all voices to be heard, and let the ideas they promote be scrutinized. Let any deceptions and evasions be uncovered. Let any oppressive agendas be exposed. For this to happen, we need a level playing field.
One problem is that what is good or useful isn't necessarily what capitalism produces, but separately, unpopular truths are not often lifted to societal consciousness through battles of intellect alone, but through a mix of varying levels of protest, including militarism. Without an organized forceful assertion of some truths, the marketplace will remain dominated by sophistry, posturing and in-group thinking, while plenty of ignorances and prejudices remain common.
Me and some of the others are concerned you might be right-leaning.
For example, most who grow up in a country will rarely if ever hear a meaningful critique of that country. In practice, there is no marketplace of ideas. Only the propaganda sphere of the propertied classes and the ever-marginalized and silenced rebels.
The marketplace has long championed ideas like prejudice is unfair and racism is unjust.
Wow, I sure am glad we solved racism. Society remains widely ignorant as to the causes of their real problems, due largely to the malignant influence of power and propaganda funded by the half-baked democracy and corrupt capitalism that liberals insist on using their hegemony to force on the world. This unwillingness to acknowledge the societal dysfunction created by liberal capitalism as tangible and avoidable leaves him unable to identify the true causes of the various malcontent and disorder he diagnoses in people. Theremin Trees often argues for an ideal that someone should have freedom of thought and freedom of action, so long as they don't harm anyone else.
The liberty to unite for any purpose not involving harm to others.
One exception he seems to permit is acting in ways considered violent under liberalism, undermining property and class relations.
Mill writes, an opinion that corn dealers are starvers of the poor, or that private property is robbery, ought to be unmolested when simply circulated through the press, but may justly incur punishment when delivered orally to an excited mob assembled before the house of a corn dealer.
While I agree that, in general, healthy political ideologies should be built on a basis of free inquiry and open dissent,
People who don't want you to think are never your friend.
there are practical moments when more coercive measures may have to be deployed during the necessary work of advancing to a better society. This is where another problem comes in. He often attacks a vaguely defined authoritarianism,
Authoritarian cultural, political, and religious groups.
which seems to lump in anyone who wants to force change, positive or negative, of which he avoids any specific engagement. And most importantly, he ignores the private dictatorship established under liberalism, which is authoritarian in itself. At the time of its founding, liberalism was considered extreme. In being opposed to the previous order of monarchy, their values had to be fought for, with revolutionary violence. In needing to be upheld through violent hegemony, in failing to live up to its higher principles, liberalism isn't much less extreme than communism and fascism. It's just gotten into power in many places and has made great efforts to appear natural and normal, like water to the fish.
It's fucking nature, dude. It's literally everything around you. Capitalism is why you see birds.
In other words, your own right to hear and be exposed is as much involved in all these cases as is the right of the other to voice his or her view. If all in society were agreed on the truth and beauty and value of one proposition, all except one person, it would be most important, in fact it would become even more important, that one heretic be heard, because we would still benefit from his perhaps outrageous or appalling view.
We've already heard fascist ideas, we've already seen their effects. There are material consequences for every moment we tolerate intolerance, or incoherent views, or wrongful oppression. Ideas are not neutral, or fun and interesting debate topics. They must be addressed seriously, as if they have real consequences.
So, as careful as we might be to make moderate, reasonable statements to support a line of valid argument, the strawman exaggerator attempts to push us into a black and white position. Even the most reasonable, patient, even-handed critics can find themselves slurred and dehumanized without a second thought by ideologues who show no regard for moderate positions. Critical thinkers will tend to resist being herded into black and white positions that fail to preserve the subtleties of their viewpoints.
3 plus 6 is 9, but so does 4 plus 5. The way you do things isn't the only way to do them. Respect other people's way of thinking. Agree?
Being moderate is not a strength when the middle position is an oppressive status quo.
Some people are surprised when an atheist defends religious freedom, when a Jew defends the freedom of expression of Holocaust deniers. Sometimes people get labeled as the enemy because they defend all human rights, including those of a perceived enemy. Jewish lawyers who've defended the human rights of anti-Semitic clients have been denounced as hypocrites, shills, even fascists. John Stuart Mill wrote that the peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race, posterity, as well as the existing generation, those who dissent from the opinion, still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error.
This obsession over the principle of letting a horrible wrong person speak, to prove how enlightened we are, is just the self-important idealism of those detached from the practical consequences of the issue. One bad thing Theremin Trees did was valorize the efforts of Cassie Jaye, an ex-feminist documentary maker who platformed a number of extreme men's rights activists in her documentary called The Red Pill, where she largely presented their views sympathetically or without challenge, culminating in a final scene where she says she is no longer a feminist.
Talking with extreme candor about her experiences interviewing leaders and followers of the men's rights movement, formerly self-defined feminist filmmaker Cassie Jaye has described how her pre-existing views of the movement prevented her from listening to what her interviewees were saying. Jaye reflected, "In those moments, sitting across from my enemy, I wasn't listening. I was waiting to hear a sentence, or even just a couple of words in succession, that proved what I wanted to believe. I would often hear an innocent and valid point that a men's rights activist would make. But in my head, I would add on to their statement a sexist or anti-woman spin, assuming that's what they wanted to say, but didn't."
This piece, far from being a brave exploration of a view she disagreed with, legitimizes an illegitimate view, that women and feminism are responsible for the ways men suffer, rather than the expectations of patriarchy, largely maintained by the men who believe they benefit from it. Liberals often emphasize that everyone is a unique individual who ought not to be infringed upon unless they cause harm to others.
Each of us is born with our own unique combination of physical and psychological capacities. We're not all the same, and overcoming tribalism doesn't entail being the same. The liberty to unite for any purpose not involving harm to others. In his essay on liberty, philosopher John Stuart Mill discussed the importance of individuality. Mill saw the free development of individuality as one of the essential elements of human well-being.
One problem that should be obvious at this point is that their society is built on harm for the majority, but it isn't identified as harm. They lay down rules that enslave the majority and funnel their wealth and power to an elite class, and condemn all attempts to end their harm as being against the freedom of individuals to choose their own path.
Unmolested.
Such reductive thinking betrays a detached immaterial idealism motivated by personal privilege and benefit, which makes sense, as capitalism is the extraction machine parasitically lodged on top of the third world masses, whose global slavery powers the material freedom and complacency of liberal empires.
You might have killed millions of people, but at the very least, you made me happy.
In one video, Theremin Trees cites the thought experiment known as the tragedy of the commons. This is a common liberal justification for the enforcement of private property laws. The idea is that individuals, each pursuing their own rational self-interest, will deplete a resource to the detriment of everyone, unless land is divided up such that the foolishness of an individual will only affect themselves.
Green cites ecologist Garrett Hardin's tragedy of the commons problem. Morality didn't evolve to promote universal cooperation. Our moral brains developed to align the individual with the group, but left us with the higher order problem of the group versus everyone else. We moved from me versus us to us versus them. Expanding on Hardin's tragedy of the commons, Green presents the tragedy of common sense morality. Instead of individual herders, we have individual groups, each with its own ideas about cooperation. Group 1 thinks land should be divided up into plots. Members have total freedom to use their plot how they want. Herders who prosper through hard work can purchase neighbouring land. Herders who are lazy or foolish, or who greedily overgraze, suffer the consequences alone, including death. Group 1 forms a council with minimal powers, simply ensuring property is respected and promises are honoured. Group 2 thinks the whole land should belong to everyone. Here, no individual prospers, but no individual is left to die. Group 2 forms a council with extensive powers, assigning and supervising all work for group members who have no autonomy. Hard workers are forced to share all proceeds with lazy workers. Both groups believe their own system represents common sense morality, while the other group's system is irrational and immoral.
Hardin's argument assumes herdsmen would always want to expand their herds, that society is an unchanging assemblage of self-interested individuals who don't care about their community. All evidence disproves this. Humans are social beings. Even existing capitalism has failed to crush human cooperation and solidarity. The fact that so-called rational herdsmen did not overgraze the commons for centuries beforehand disproves Hardin's assumptions. In short, Hardin didn't describe the behavior of herdsmen in pre-capitalist farming communities. He described the behavior of capitalists operating in a capitalist economy. The universal human nature that he claimed would always destroy common resources is actually the profit-driven grow or die behavior of capitalists. This is notable because Hardin's ideas were used primarily to justify property appropriation and enclosure by English governance at the time. What it comes down to is that the violence of capitalism and imperialism is invisible to liberals. In such a fantasy world, they can imagine themselves the good guys, running a voluntary order, as opposed to the totalitarian maniacs.
Dogmatic ideological groups can easily cross over into becoming maniacal, tyrannical, and totalitarian, so that eventually just a word, maybe even a look, is taken as adequate provocation for violence.
In reality, this regime of forced capitalism is violent, and socialism is the fight by whatever means to end that violence. When liberals refuse to see this, they will believe all manner of confusing and contradictory things.
In these two videos, as a very young child, some Jew forcing humans into submission, murdering widows, loving discipline, enslavement, not the stuff of school nativities. You will have to experience it for yourself to understand the true feeling of God's love. Others have suggested I must be damaged in some way. With this distorted concept in place, we can now claim as much love as we want. I love you. Can you feel it?
Throughout his videos, he constantly quotes hypocritical liberals whose ideologies and regimes went on to terrorize the world and lay the groundwork for fascism. When called out on this, he said this in a later video.
I often start my videos with a quote. Over the years, people have criticized some of the authors, citing some past transgression, minor or major. They've criticized me for appealing to dubious authorities. But I'm not appealing to authority. The quotes are about the idea, not the author. The author is incidental. Often, many people will have converged on the same thought. Sometimes I'll have significant disagreements with the author. The source doesn't validate or negate the idea. The idea stands or falls on its own terms. If authors have failed to uphold their own stated values, we get an entertaining smack of irony.
The problem is not only that many of these people failed to live up to their own principles, but also that said principles were inadequate in the first place. I'm just going to come out and say it. If liberals were truly really as concerned with freedom, democracy, and fraternity as they say they are, then I think they should recognize their shared values with the socialists, and repudiate the actions taken by their government to demonize and stamp out every attempt at communism the world over.
Communism killed everyone on the planet. By it, Goku got all the Dragon Balls and brought them back.
Liberals, who have never put a serious thought to the necessary evils that might be committed when going against their corrupt world order, can easily condemn from the sidelines all the ethically unpure actions of the forceful enemy, as being against the good values they supposedly stand for. Meanwhile, their states act invisibly in the background to blot out any attempts at a more peaceful socialism before they can even start.
10 years gulag. Go to gulag. Stalin gulag name. Yeah. What's wrong, comrade? Why'd you stop laughing, huh? Being sectarian again now, are we? No, not really, dude. Just mostly concerned for my physical safety.
I am not someone who defends figures like Stalin, but it must be understood. Much of the terror committed by socialist leaders evolved out of the extreme circumstances liberals put them in, with mass repression, trade embargo, subterfuge, and outright war. Socialist states take extreme measures to survive that only seem to confirm the totalitarian monsters liberals want to frame them as. A misunderstanding liberals seem to have about socialist states is that they were plain dictatorships, that every order came down from on high and suited the whims of a leader or small group. In fact, the vast majority of societal function in day-to-day life was overseen by a robust collection of councils, which propelled life in these countries to a before-unseen level of involvement of common people in the affairs of their own life. Beyond leadership, socialism of some kind or another was a societal consensus. The liberal straw man, that I see even in some of my own anarchist circles, is that the corruptions and failures of places like the USSR are solely the result of giving a small group great power. But what must be recognized by any honest person is that these flaws were at least in part based on a consensus among common people. Most people of any view are kind of average or stupid. They build their worldview purely off of personal experience. They don't have very good reasoning for their beliefs, and can be swayed fairly easily with rhetoric and sophistry. They often implement their ideas poorly, or in ways that are ineffective or problematic, but it doesn't mean their actual view is necessarily wrong. There are people in socialist movements who are trying and struggling to make the average member more informed and effective. This framing of evil dictators overruling the masses sucks the complexity out of what could be a more meaningful analysis, which might actually reveal the real flaws at the heart of such societies. I speak to this more in other work. From the communist point of view, the idealism of the liberals, which calls upon all involved to settle their differences with peace and ideas, is firstly a false leveling technique that ignores the inherently aggressive nature of capitalism towards the working masses and societal progress, as well as equating actions of resistance with those of repression.
Joe's attempting a form of psychological manipulation known as leveling. This is where a person or group whose conduct is significantly worse than another on any objective analysis of the situation tries to assert equal moral standing, claiming a false equivalence in the conduct of both parties by adding bogus elements to their opponent's side and denying awkward elements on their own side. When individuals or groups start to shut down and prohibit criticism and challenge, it's about the biggest possible warning sign in any context: religion, politics, education. It signals the onset of totalitarian systems. Stick around, and you can wave goodbye to successive freedoms. And with each freedom you give up, you can watch yourself regress into a powerless, compliant child.
When you've never read leftist theory in your life, but you have read that book with the talking animals running the farm.
Everyone is stupid except me.
In striving for a distorted idea of freedom, one that only grants freedom to those we agree with, we could end up opposing freedom, becoming authoritarian, controlling, even totalistic. In striving for a distorted idea of equality, one that denies natural variations in preferences between groups, we could end up advocating gross inequalities.
Communists cannot afford to hold such values as the world comes toppling in on their heads. Such heady ideas must be thrown away to meet the needs of the moment. The communists have no hope of securing a chance for a better society without first forcefully removing the fascists from political power and meeting the waves of reactionaries sent their way by liberal states. Of course, there are some good arguments to be made for the various problems that arise when militantly opposing liberalism, but such arguments are usually best made by those who still do recognize a need to overturn that order, lest the argument against be motivated primarily by a preference for the existing order and a convenient incuriosity towards examining the system's problems. What we need are tangible analyses of failure and suggestions of improvement for future projects, not fables for children about how stopping evil makes you evil. In his production, Letting Go of Fixing People, we're introduced to the idea that it is healthy and practical for normal people not to concern themselves with the redemption of abusive people.
Many targets of abuse wrestle with a desire to fix people in the abusive situation.
He frames the impulse to try again and again in healing an abuser as its own kind of dysfunction, in similar measure to the problem they are trying to fix.
Targets offer boundless love, reassurance, and understanding in the hope of counteracting the abuser's negativity and healing their destructive compulsions. Individuals can drive themselves to exhaustion trying to mend people they can't mend.
He appeals that many abusers are pathologically stuck and extremely unlikely to change, as well as likely to use therapeutic lessons as weapons rather than to reflect.
As we tip over into the more extreme side of the narcissism spectrum, hope tails off exponentially.
Both people involved, the abuser and the person attempting to reform, are said to be stuck in an endless harmful loop and needing to change.
There can be a huge temptation to deny or minimize the problem, or fantasize that their abusers will see the error of their ways and transform into a decent human being. These fantasies, hopes, and denials all work to keep targets stuck in the abuse.
A category of person known as an abuser is established as someone unlikely to be amenable to change by normal social methods, and then the concept of a codependent person is contrasted against them, as naively reading equal emotions and motivations into an abuser while trying to save them with love.
But instead of taking a step back, they rush forward, offering boundless empathy in the hope of eventually filling the hole. They have no idea of the depth of that hole.
A narrative is then built that it is largely pointless to try to get through to most abusers.
Just like targets, abusers have all the information they need. If they really want to heal, no one's stopping them. Giving up trying to fix people doesn't mean giving up on people. It just means acknowledging we can only be of help to people who are ready to change. If clients do get fixed, it's because they've worked on fixing themselves. The client has to be open to change. We have to stand back and let people work through their own problems with minimal intervention. In fact, it could be said that one of the biggest signs of healing in ourselves is when we can start letting go of fixing people.
I do not disagree with most of his individual points, but I do think that this sort of framing demonstrates once again the liberal predisposition to identify the problem within individuals, and skip over considerations of wider systemic circumstances and the origins of these behaviors. I am worried that videos like these may encourage some people to identify categorically unchangeable pathology where there is none, and be illusioned that simply walking away is a complete solution. Our society's institutions concerning mental health are corrupt and inadequate, and in many ways, only we can help each other by intervening on each other's lives. I am not disputing that many abusers cannot be helped, especially by those who they've dehumanized and abused their whole lives. But I am worried about notions of unchangeable abusers encouraging a mindset of being quick to demonize and absolve ourselves of any responsibility to nudge each other in the right direction. I think we cannot rely on institutions to fix these problems, nor can we afford to turn our eyes from societal dysfunction and relegate the problem to some unseen other. One thing Theremin Trees does not seem to be fully grappling with about the situation we face is that this situation is unsustainable, and all the most abusive people will, if they cannot be easily or meaningfully changed, and must simply be avoided or abandoned as his ideology seems to suggest, need to be dealt with through other means at some point. If we don't act despite their stubborn ignorance, short-sighted self-centeredness, our planet will rot, and worse, fascisms and war will befall us. That he does not see his job as to rally the progressive and educated-minded peoples towards learning to cope with and contribute most effectively to that necessary future vision, shows a naivety that things can keep going on like this. This is my primary point. The contradictions of capitalism are coming to a head again. At this point it's either socialism or barbarism. At one point or another every working person will have to come to terms with their role in the coming revolution. And as a therapist, Theremin Trees is meant for more than coaching people on how to personally cope with a broken world. They are supposed to be preparing people to meet the challenge of a world in need of change, to make sure that we don't fail this time, because liberalism does not have the answers to our current situation. An underlying element here is a notion of agency and free will that is typical of liberal thinkers, of a person being able to overcome their state and achieve more than their material life incentivizes.
The fundamental point about Bundy's followers and the woman who married her father is that their attraction to abusers was conscious. They saw the menace in their midst and chose to walk towards it. Just like targets, abusers have all the information they need. If they really want to heal, no one's stopping them.
The truth is, I've been over this topic in many other videos, and I'm tired. Here's an example.
Every time you have been put in the position of making a choice in your life, you chose, based on these factors. 1. Genetic predisposition towards certain behaviors. 2. Learned behavior from parents, school and society. 3. What it was possible to do physically. 4. Within the conscious limitations of an ape, driven by survival instincts, flawed perception and reasoning, physical needs and emotional compulsions that take precedence over principled and rational action. 5. Within your knowledge of available options you had at the time. 6. The physical and emotional state of your brain the moment before you made the choice, which made only certain choices prominent in your mind, and made the selection of that particular choice inevitable. These are the restrictions placed on you, the person forced to consciously experience and witness the life of the ape you've been assigned, as said ape carries out precisely the actions which a being that had experienced the events of its own life, up until any point in time, would have, endlessly, until it dies. Your life would play out the same, no matter how many times we rewinded it. It's cause and effect, baby.
Free will, in this sense, is not only an illusion, it is used to excuse and prop up many of the dysfunctional elements of liberalism, such as punishing individuals for social crimes, or blaming the poor for being poor. If you'd like to know more about this subject specifically, may I recommend to you my video, How to Redeem Bad People, in the top right. In one video he gives an example of a man who defends himself during a mugging, and severely injures the attackers, who goes on to feel guilt and ruminate over whether he had been too hard on them.
When the muggers jumped him from behind, flashing a knife in his face, instinctively, Troy found himself fighting back, as he put it, like a cat on drugs. Within the space of a few seconds, one of his attackers was immobilized with a broken leg, and the other was concussed into unconsciousness. Troy was able to lay the ultimate responsibility for his attacker's injuries where it belonged, on them. They chose to jump a stranger in the street and put him in fear of his life. By creating that volatile situation, they put not only Troy but themselves at risk. Unfortunately for them, in their case, that risk backfired.
While I agree with his conclusion that the guy did nothing wrong in defending himself, his framing of the attackers as having made a choice is very reductive and dodges considerations of how material poverty drives crime, by necessity, and how this unjust system didn't just victimize Troy, but also victimizes those it drives to the desperation and ignorance of mugging as well. Theremin Trees is much better than most on the topic of youth rights.
In healthy families, parents respect and foster their children's emerging desire for independence and privacy. It's as if Karen and Isolde don't own their own bodies. They're just renting them from their parental landlords, who expect their property to be maintained to their specification. The fact that children are asking a question is a sign they're ready for some kind of answer, even a partial one. Your birth wasn't a gift to you. It was your parents' gift to themselves. They gave themselves a child. It's what parents do for their children once they're born that counts.
However, in a number of videos discussing childhood sexual abuse in high control groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses, Theremin Trees presents a simple dichotomy of secular authorities swooping in to save children from abusive high control groups.
When Stewart gave the obvious answer that they could report to the child protection authorities, Bowditch said that was done in some cases. Stewart further noted that if contacting child protection authorities was an automatic first step, there'd be no need for elders to interview the child. McClellan also noted that civil authorities had the benefit of decades of scientific research in the assessment and treatment of abusers.
I wish he would acknowledge that state authorities who call their extremely punitive methods justice represent a response that is out of step with the needs of abusers and victims, and often contribute to the continuation of the problems that led to the abuse in the first place. For example, many victims feel they want justice, but do not believe in the long prison sentences, the corrupt and brutal nature of containment, or the lack of focus on reform in these institutions. On the other end, the fear of cruel punishment keeps perpetrators from coming out, owning their crimes or seeking help before they offend. Then there's the problem that in many of these legal systems, children are rendered near property of their parents and have no independent power to meet their needs or emancipate themselves, trapping hundreds of thousands of kids with the arbitrary abusive family they've happened to have been born into. Rendering children powerless quite literally manifests in abuse. Restorative and redemptive methods of justice are something I think therapists should be exploring more, or at least including in the conversation, and punitive justice should be identified as what it is: a revenge drive disguised as justice, enforced by a corrupt order that has cops acting more as violent enforcers of power, property and wealth, rather than moral heroes. Oddly enough, there are times when he seems to be able to recognize the fundamentally broken and corrupt nature of his society's legal order, such as when he criticized the persecution of so-called communists under McCarthyism.
They were asked whether they were now or ever had been members of the American Communist Party, and about whether they'd attended certain political meetings. If they refused to answer, they could be jailed for contempt. If they answered yes, they'd be commanded to name others. If they refused, they could be jailed for contempt.
But oddly enough, this has not prevented the continuous valorization of such legal orders throughout much of his work.
They could have asked for advice from teachers, psychologists, child protection agencies. Targets who don't feel ready to call directly on law enforcement can access support and practical guidance from other confidential services. Legal protections don't just safeguard our well-being in the broad sense. They also work to prevent innocent citizens being trapped in state-approved double binds, like murder, justifiable homicide, and assisted suicide, in recognition of the huge differences in circumstance and motive. The rigorous standards seen in courtrooms are specifically designed to minimize prejudicial elements, such as fear, ignorance, bias, and self-advancement, that can pervert the course of justice.
To me, this kind of belief in liberal legal procedure shows a serious lack of research on the topic.
Our identity, our beliefs, or lack of them, who we're attracted to or not attracted to. For abusers, all these languages, reason, fairness, understanding, and honesty, undermine their power position by providing a path to truth and accountability. They take refuge in other languages, non sequiturs, double talk, word salad, and barefaced lies to maintain their corrupted sense of power. But the people who subjugate us aren't always openly abusive. Some inspire our genuine loyalty, even love. Some come in the guise of a hero. Citizens offer limitless personal data to governments and corporate giants with childlike trust, believing their best interests will be served. When we view heroes realistically as fallible human beings with accessible qualities, ideas, and skills, we can appreciate them and learn from them without diminishing ourselves.
At times, Theremin Tree's work can almost seem to have a sort of libertarian left, anarchist, anti-authoritarian message, with a positive image of humanity as being able to manage their own affairs absent coercion, of condemning most violent hierarchical relationships, with an emphasis put on freedom as the basis for society. But this view means very little without firm opposition to the material inequities of capitalism or the failures and violence of liberal democracy. Unfortunately, Theremin Trees never says anything tangible about the failures of capitalism or a need for socialism. By treating the existing order as neutral or honorable, he ends up leaving people unprepared for the reality which will need to be faced by every working person. I wouldn't have made this video if I didn't think that, under it all, Theremin Trees shares very similar values to me. I believe he means well. He is just misguided. Unfortunately, he is unknowingly spreading his misunderstandings to others under the guise of wellness, and it is this I must condemn. I don't want to believe that he is some kind of white supremacist, which is the value system that liberalism has been utilized in service of, by enshrining racism and other prejudices into the economic structure, and imperializing the world in favor of those who conquered their way to the top first. I just think he doesn't understand the socialist point of view, and that is understandable, as much material effort has been made, on behalf of his favored system, to keep the public ignorant about it, to demonize it, and construct sophisticated thought-terminating cliches to dismiss it. Although I don't think one video can instantly change anyone, I do intend to show with this video that communists and anarchists can be intelligent, reasonable people, and that this is an area of thought at least worth exploring.
She said, "If you tell me something critical about myself that I don't recognize, I'll hold it with me for a time. Reflect on it. See if I can see what you're seeing. If I find there's some truth in what you say, I'll gratefully take it on board. You've taught me something about myself. But if I find there isn't any truth, then I'm looking at you. And I'm wondering what issues you have that you're trying to offload on me."
Despite the criticisms I've made, I think that this channel is overall pretty great, and I recommend it to everyone. This cross-section of criticisms may have made him look bad, but most of the time his work is not only correct, but of high quality and deeply moving. He is exceptional as far as the platform goes. But I do recommend that you approach his work with a particular mindset of being conscious that these videos focus on what the individual can do to prepare themselves for a flawed world, without much of a strong stance taken on what precisely is flawed about the world. A lot of presupposing that liberal democracy is a somewhat fair and balanced system, and a natural result of human society, without a particular recognition of the need for an end to capitalism, without the appropriate empathy for those suffering under the forces of imperialism.
Thanks for not saying, another could crack it down, unlimited genocide on the first world, at my grandpa's funeral. I know that took restraint.
And a general lack of focus on systemic analysis and methods of coping with a world in need of change. With that mindset, you can take what is useful about this work, and discard the other guff that holds back the channel. My darling child. How are you doing? Feel free to snuggle up with me however you like. That's my good girl. I'm sorry Mommy's been so busy lately. Instead of spending time with you, I'm burning myself out working. It's not anything you've done, honey. I'm just trying to make the world safer for us, in the only way I know how. I'm very appreciative of you. You know that? All your little efforts to make me feel loved and appreciated. Thank you for caring for me in this difficult time. You make it so much easier to go on. With your cute beady eyes and smile looking up at me, I know I can accomplish anything. Sometimes I feel like I could never show you enough love. Because you always deserve more. I'm very proud of you, you know that? Ever since you came into my life, you've been trying so hard. I wish you didn't have to. With me, you don't have to. I'm just glad to see you. Thank you for seeing me, and for being there for me. In the darkness, you are my light. I'm sorry that some of the people in your life can't understand your new view and path. I know what it's like to want so badly to take them along with you. I know what it's like to not be seen or heard by someone you love. I know what it's like to have to let go, and face the harsh cold of a world with no guarantees. You've done your best. It's not your fault they refuse to see you, that they refuse to listen. Everyone has their own journey, and you've already done your part. Fate is a cruel mistress. She wants us to watch the disaster unfold in front of our eyes. She wants us to feel helpless. All we have is each other. I cannot believe I am so lucky as to get to share my life with you. My beautiful baby girl. You're my stinky dum-dum, my poo-poo head.